So Glenn Hening phoned me up in 1984. He said, Malibu's facing a big environmental problem. We want to create a foundation that's going to be called Surfrider Foundation. We want you to be our first ambassador member. And we need a poster and we need a copy for the poster. We need an ad. So I found a super cool photo from Aaron Chang of me doing a big bottom turn at Pipeline. And I wrote, do a good turn today. And that was Surfrider Foundation's first poster. And for me, I like to think, maybe that was a turning point in my life. It was the first time I've been involved in a movement, in an environmental movement. And I've been involved with Surfrider ever since. Uh, I've been on the board a few times, love what they're doing, have had great relationships with all the CEOs. The current CEO, Chad Nelsen, is a terrific guy.
That was 1977 surfing world champion Shaun Tomson. My name is David Scales for the Surfrider podcast, brought to you by the Surfrider Foundation. And today we're going to be hearing about the genesis of the Surfrider Foundation from one of the founders, and then the subsequent 40 years of work from the current CEO, whom Shaun Tomson was just referencing, Dr. Chad Nelsen.
The Surfrider Foundation was founded in 1984 at Surfrider Hotel at Surfrider Beach in Malibu. A lot of people think it's a verb, not a location, right? Riding surf, but it's really about a place. And it was founded by three guys: Glenn Hening, who is an aerospace engineer, surfer, wild man; Tom Pratte, an environmentalist from Humboldt County; and Lance Carson, legendary pro surfer.
A confluence of social and cultural movements inspired the organization, but for this group of surfers, the timing coalesced around an imminent threat at Malibu. Here's Surfrider founder Glenn Hening.
Well, the first thing we did, when I dreamed this whole thing up and I said, yeah, we're going to do it, we knew we needed the name of a famous surfer. And the only famous surfer we knew Jay Riddle, California's best surfer throughout the 70s. He was just, if you knew what real surfing was, and you knew that competitions were kind of one thing, but here's another version of surfing. Jay Riddle was just the most amazing surfer there was, but he wasn't, given to the kind of ideas that, in terms of an organization. And so other than Jay and a couple other guys, the only person we knew was Lance Carson. And so I was able to arrange a meeting with Lance Carson, and it was to him that I first uttered the name, well, I'm going to start an organization called the Surfrider Foundation. And I told him what I had in mind. And he said, well, if you're going to do that, count me in. I don't want to go to any meetings, and I don't have to sign anything. But yeah, sure, I'll be a part of it. Of course, what you want to do is, what are you going to do about what's happening at Malibu? And I go, I was living in Pasadena at the time, writing computer code. I didn't know. So he told me about what had happened at Malibu in 1983 when they carved up the channels that became Malibu Lagoon State Park, and how they were emptying the lagoons. They were carving a channel straight across the beach and emptying the lagoon straight into First Point, and they completely ruined the shape of the wave. So the very first thing we did was in defense, not in defense of pollution issues. It wasn't about surfers getting sick from the ocean. It was about, hey, you're ruining our perfect wave. Okay. And Tom Pratte set up a meeting, with the Parks and Rec people. And we had that meeting, and we made a really good case. And Lance gave a really good speech at Point Dume Elementary School. And the Parks and Rec guys, they kind of listen to everything, and they're kind of going, okay, well, all right, thank you very much. We appreciate public input on this issue, and, we'll certainly, be in touch with you as necessary. And my buddy LJ Woods from the audience says, well, what the fuck does that mean? You're going to continue to ruin the place? Excuse my French, David. I don't know if you're going to edit that or not. But so that whole room started yelling at these guys. So Tom Pratte goes over to these guys and says, hey, you guys better come up with some answers right now, or you're going to have a real problem getting out of here. And so the Parks and Rec guys said, well, and We really understand your position, and we are going to do everything we can to make the modifications that you need us to make. Thank you very much. And then they got out of there.
Glenn was the surfer who was concerned about how population growth and the popularity of surfing was affecting the waves and the culture. But Tom Pratte was the environmentalist. In fact, he earned the first ever degree in coastal environmental studies, and many of Tom's early initiatives are still in motion at Surfrider today. So we'll hear more about him shortly, but it's also important to understand the cultural landscape in 1984 that impressed upon Glenn the need to protect the resource of the ocean.
I mean, I actually have a picture of my baby daughter, who was born in January of '84. I'm holding my baby daughter or actually her grandfather's holding Helen, and I'm taking a picture as the torch is going by. Okay. And the whole idea, of course, of Surfrider being a function of the moment she was born and my life changed, my thought was, your whole surfing life, how's that going to benefit her? And the answer was, you go ahead and do this organization. Okay, so that was the moment, the actual birthing moment of the Surfrider Foundation. In some ways, happened in the delivery room of when my daughter was born in January of '84. Okay, so fast forward through 1984. In the spring, in March, I went and surfed Honolulu Bay for 2 weeks. Okay, I had a computer consulting firm. Okay, I was actually recruited to go work at JPL. So a lot of stuff was happening in '84. Okay, the most overarching thing in Los Angeles at the time, though, was of course the Olympics. So we had a chance to go to track and field one afternoon, and I brought along a spiral notebook because I wanted to use that setting as an opportunity to think big about surfing. Okay, and to try and visualize something that we could hold up in the world of surfing as an example that would measure up to Olympic standards in terms of character, in terms of a global community about what could we do that would be just absolutely as bitchin' as all of this. You know, Evelyn Ashford winning the 100-meter women's, Carl Lewis, winning one of the 100-meter heats, Edward Moses, the 440, or the 400-meter high hurdles. I mean, excellence. I mean, color, scale. Just like, yeah, this is great. Now, we didn't have any ideas as far as contests or competition. What we were thinking about was community. Okay, and so to actually see the Olympic community and to be a part of that was a very powerful opportunity. And so I just started writing notes about what we wanted the organization to be. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, that's the piece of paper.
No way.
Yeah.
That is unbelievable.
Yeah, it's like, and the title is Notes from the Shadow of the Torch, because where we were sitting up at the top, the Olympic torch was just about 50 meters over here.
Even in 1984, surfers had a sort of bad reputation, lazy, burnout, dropouts. I can't remember when Fast Times came out, but Spicoli didn't help that. It's right around that same era. That stereotype persists today. So I think surfers had a bad reputation. Glenn, one of the founders, had a daughter, so he's starting to think about the future instead of the LA Olympics were in town in 1984, and from what Glenn's told me, they looked at the reverence of those athletes and compared to surfers, and it didn't feel the same. And third, we were losing surf spots and the ocean was polluted. So Killer Dana gone, Malibu chronically polluted, modifying the inlet at Malibu without any sort of input from the surfing community. So they felt like surfers were not part of the decision-making process. So I think all of those things said, hey, surfers need to find a way to get more involved in society, improve our reputation as citizens of the world, and tackle some of these threats that are impacting surfing. Over time, the organization evolved towards focusing on environmental issues.
Yeah.
My sense is because um, that was perceived as the biggest threat when Surfrider started winning battles. One of our first wins is they were going to put a big breakwater in front of Imperial Beach, Tijuana
Mhm.
Sloughs. Sadly, today too polluted to surf, but that's a famous surf spot, and they were going to kill it. And so if you look at the newsletters that are like up on the wall at our headquarters, the first newsletter, the first win is wave saved, breakwater stopped at Imperial Beach. So those are the kind of issues I think we're starting to drive the surfing community to reach out to Surfrider and say, hey, we've got a threat over here. Can you help us?
From my perspective over the years, when I wasn't involved with communicating with Surfrider, it seemed that protecting surf spots was with the intention of surfers wanting to surf those waves. But it seems like now there's also kind of an environmental concern there too, oftentimes with like the development of that breakwater or the marina in Bolsa Chica. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's sort of two ways to look at that. One is if you think about what threatens a wave or your ability to surf a wave, right? You can't get to it because it's closed off, so beach access. When you do get to it, the water's so polluted you can't surf it, which is Imperial Beach today. So it's about water pollution and not getting sick. Baja Malibu, 100 million gallons of raw sewage going into that surf spot every day. Like I tell people all the time, like, don't do it. It'll really, so there's water quality. Seawalls, breakwaters, groins, structures that could alter a surf spot or the sand or sediment is an issue that would screw up a wave. That's the save trestles fight. Um, Plastic pollution is kind of more aesthetic, but we're drowning. Look at Bali and that famous picture that Zach Noyle took of the guy getting barreled in the plastic, right? So plastic pollution is an ocean threat. And then, you know, I think that we more than just like getting barreled, like communing with a wild, healthy, vibrant ocean, dolphins, whales, fish, healthy coral reefs is part of the experience too. So sort of conservation. So when you think about saving a wave, it's actually protecting the environment, the surf ecosystem that makes that wave function. And so I think, if you start getting into the wave saving business, you get into surf ecosystems and environmental work pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And waves are sensitive to change. We all know this, right? You go surfing and the sandbars shift, the tide's wrong. Like there's so many factors that have to come together. So you make subtle changes, beach fill projects, beach nourishment projects, like can totally alter these waves. So you mess with the environment, usually it has a negative impact on the surf spot. So I think through surf conservation, you become an ocean conservationist.
And this brings us back to surfing's first full time environmental activist, Tom Pratte.
Tom Pratte was very reserved. Um, he was data intensive. Okay, when he went to Humboldt State University, he designed his own major in coastal environmental studies. Okay, so he was the first person to actually have a degree in coastal environmental studies. Okay, he was the first surfer to have standing in front of the California Coastal Commission. Okay, he carved a path out with the WSA, Western Surfing Association at the time. He got the support of Grubby Clark. Tom was a very reserved. For example, when I told him we're going to have the newsletter, and the name of the newsletter is going to be Making Waves, he said, well, that's kind of pushy, don't you think? And I said, yeah, we're surfers. So Tom was at the same time, okay, his understanding of environmental issues made him surfing's first professional environmentalist. And as things were evolving, it became clear that my version of changing surfing completely. And in some ways, I over time, Shaun's referred to me in very glowing terms. He even compared me in a speech once to Duke Kahanamoku.
Mm.
Well, I won't go that far, but I will go that far comparing Tom Pratte, because he was the guy who we had all he understood the issues, and he knew how to talk to the Coast Commission. He knew how to talk to state parks officials. In our first victory, for example, we were, I had a graphic presentation, Lance Carson's speech, had a room full of surfers. They were kind of rowdy. Tom was very measured. Tom knew, the realities of protecting what we had. And so I had to make a conscious decision at some point to have the organization shift away from my version of changing surfing, writ large, to being a membership driven, issues oriented environmental organization that fit Tom Pratte's version of the organization. Surfrider is what it is today, thanks to him. You see, like the logo, the original logo, the whole idea there was what it takes to be inside that, to see that for real. All the courage, judgment, determination, timing, physical conditioning, skill to actually be inside perfect waves. Take all of that and apply it on the other side of Coast Highway. So, but in the end, Tom Pratte was far and away the most, for my money, the most significant surfer that I can think of, beyond, other than in some ways Duke Kahanamoku, because Tom Pratte created a completely different version of being a surfer. And the idea that surfers now had a voice, surfers now had standing. I mean, he was actually the guy who made the Coastal Commission recognize surfing as a recreational resource, and it hadn't been on that list. And if you can get surfing recognized as a recreational resource, then surfing is no different than fishing.
Right.
Okay. And therefore, it would follow that the Coastal Act and the idea of protecting recreational resources, now, according to the Coastal Act, surfing had to be protected. And Tom Pratte was the guy who did that.
Through the influence of Tom Pratte's environmentalism and the proximity to his alma mater, Humboldt State University, Surfrider took on their first major legal battle against two paper mills in Humboldt County who were polluting the Pacific Ocean. This legal battle resulted in the mills paying $5.6 million in fines, and one of the mills becoming the first in North America to produce totally chlorine-free paper.
I've been with Surf. We're 40 years old last year. I've been here for 26 of those years, almost 27. And I do think there's like sort of these distinct phases of over that time period. And I think the Humboldt, which was this second largest Clean Water Act lawsuit in the country at the time, led by a pretty legendary surfing environmental activist named Mark Massara, who was on staff at Surfrider back then. This paper mill was dumping polluted effluent into the surf in Humboldt. We sued them and won this huge lawsuit. It was all net made national news. Surfers take on giant paper mill and win. At the time, it was David and Goliath. That continues, I think, today for us, and put us on the national map. And so all of a sudden, from what I heard, is that again, a little bit before my time, the phone started ringing from all over the country. Surfers in Florida, New Jersey, New York, Washington. I got a problem. How can you help me? You got this tiny little organization with like 5 staff, then based in Huntington, now in San Clemente, um, going, I don't know. And it was actually that issue. So it kind of, I think Surfrider went from like regional SoCal surf conservation focused group to like national attention at that point. And that's actually when we kind of shortly thereafter conceived the chapter model, which
Gotcha.
was like, hey, we can't help you. You can help yourself and we'll help you do it. And so that chapter model, which I think has proven to be incredibly effective, which I can tell you about, came out of that national attention and surfers from around the country saying how to, and probably the world, like, help me. There was a guy on our board of directors who was a Sierra Club, um,
Oh yeah.
sort of big guy in the Sierra Club. Sierra Club has a grassroots chapter model, so we mimicked ours after theirs. And so I think the idea was, look, well, we don't have the capacity to help people all over the country. Um, but if they want to get organized, we can help them figure it out. So I think it was born out of necessity, and you know, what we've learned subsequently is it's super powerful model.
Mm.
Uh, so first of all, like, I mean, in my hometown, which is Laguna Beach, like there's, the surf uh community is divided into like a couple different groups, right? If people come surf my side of town, I'm like, hey, what are you guys doing over here? So super surfers are hyper localized, right? You
Okay.
have East Side, West Side, and Santa Cruz. Um, and so knowing your local place and really your community has great value. So like what makes sense in Texas or Florida or Maine or Oregon is going to be totally different. So it allows that kind of like nuance of local surfers and local issues and local community to be reflected versus one big group trying to do everything. And they're also locals, so they know everyone. So there's a lot of advantages to that local level work in terms of getting it right, getting it done, getting the right people involved. And so it turns out to be really effective. The challenges are now we've got 200 chapters and clubs. There's a lot of personalities and a lot of people, thousands of people out there doing stuff on behalf of Surfrider, which is powerful in terms of scale, but you're just managing a lot of volunteers. So we spend a lot of time and energy doing that. And then scaling that local work up to state and federal is kind of another part of the secret sauce of Surfrider.
It seems like the early days of Surfrider was responding to problems or threats. Was there a moment or initiative where Surfrider kind of became more proactive in preventing future of threats?
Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, so, in the beginning, it was a pulp mill polluting, proposed breakwater that was going to destroy a surf spot in Imperial Beach. So, like, the threats were coming at us. Seawall going to destroy the beach. And so we were pretty reactive, which is also kind of typical of a lot of environmental groups. They're trying to stop bad things from happening. I think, in the probably in the late 90s, early 2000s, kind of the next phase of Surfrider's sort of organizational growth, we kind of professionalized. We wrote a strategic plan for the first time as an organization. And I think that's when we kind of shifted and said, okay, uh, the reactive fights is ultimately a losing strategy, right? You stop something, you stop the toll road at Trestles, and all you've done is maintain status quo. Like if you go down there now, the goal was to make it like similar to when you went down there 20 years ago. But every time you lose a reactive fight, we take a step backwards. Um, and so it's not a winning strategy in the long run, especially now that we have like things like climate change that are coming at us. It's
Hmm.
not just us, arguably we did that, but so so yeah, we started shifting and saying, hey, we need to actually start getting ahead of these problems. A good example is, we can do beach cleanups till we're like blue in the face. That's a reactive strategy, right? We're gonna go take the stuff that's already been polluted and pick it up off the beach. And we'll never like beach clean up our way out of the problem. So we're like, hey, why don't we try to get rid of that stuff before it ends up on the beach? And that's passing laws and policies to try to eliminate single-use plastic that we're finding on the beach. So that's shifting from reactive, treating the problem or the symptoms, to proactive, trying to stop it at the source.
How do you do that? I mean, do you hire attorneys and do you hire lobbyists? What does that look like making policy
You know,
change?
our sort of approach at Surfrider is this kind of, we call bottom up, top down. So the bottom up is, let's start in the communities where we have our chapters, and this is what we did, like 15 years ago, which was, hey, let's get rid of single-use plastic bags. We're finding those on the beaches everywhere. We collect data on our beach cleanup, so we know what we find. We're like, let's go get rid of those things. And so San Francisco is the first city to get rid of them. Manhattan Beach followed shortly thereafter. And so we started passing local bag bans. And we were trying to get a state bag ban. We couldn't do it. The plastic bag industry is powerful, plastics industry. And we eventually got critical mass where we had like a third of the state population in local bans. And then actually the Grocers Association came to us and said, this is too complex. It's a patchwork. We don't like which Ralphs can have bags or can't have bags or Albertsons. And so they actually got on board and said, why don't we do this together and come up with a way to make it work? So that's an example of kind of starting local. And then we passed, ultimately, California passed in 2014, I think, the first statewide bag ban. And we've gone on to tackle a bunch of the other commonly found items at the beach. But that's kind of the methodology. And for us, it's like we'll work with a chapter to pass an ordinance, which is writing up an ordinance, or working with their city council to do it. If it works, we'll take that ordinance and we'll share it with other chapters and say, hey, this worked in San Francisco or Manhattan Beach. Try it in San Clemente or Laguna or, Encinitas, wherever. So that's kind of how it works. Sometimes we don't do a lot of work with lobbyists, but occasionally on big case, like when we were working on the Trestles Coalition, we had lobbyists in DC and California. That was part of a larger coalition. They weren't even Surfriders, so they were just part of the larger coalition's team of folks. But most of it's just sweat equity at local level. We have policy experts inside the building. So we have like a team of plastic policy experts that understand the science, the law, and like how to bill or evaluate whether we think something that's being proposed is good or bad.
Got it. You talked about you had data. So can you tell me about the Blue Water Task Force and how that was developed and why?
Yeah, it's one of the earliest programs that Surfrider was established, I think maybe in 1990. Um, so before 2000, when we passed a bill, it's a national bill that like nationalized water testing, um, you know, the problem with dirty water is sometimes you can see it and sometimes you can't.
Mm,
So if it's nasty and brown after a rain, it's pretty obvious it's dirty. But a lot of times the water can be polluted and you can't see it. But so we started going out and testing the water ourselves because surfers were getting sick. And and we started finding places that were polluted, which was Malibu was the case. There was a wastewater treatment plant up the Capia, up the creek that was dumping effluent into the Malibu Creek. And that's true all over the place. And so we started finding high bacteria results. And I mean, this is a battle that continues today. But then people would say, well, we don't believe you. You're a bunch of volunteers. And we're like, all right, prove us wrong. And that started, then agencies would start testing, and when the problems were highlighted, it's bad business to have polluted water in a tourist town. And so then the problems started getting solved. And so over time it's evolved, and we do about 10,000 samples a year. We have 50 labs across the country, and there is a lot of good agency testing out there now, which complements it, which is great. But sometimes they don't test spots we care about because the surf spots aren't, they tend to focus understandably on the places where there's most use. So like tourist beaches. A lot, the requirements are only to test in the summer.
okay.
So not everywhere has year-round testing, but we surf year-round. So there are places where we want to test in the winter, particularly if it's rainier in the winter, because that can impact the water quality. In some cases, we work with schools more as like a supplemental program to get kids thinking about it's a microbiology experiment. So we get kids thinking about what it means to have polluted water and how it works. So it's been kind of like a flagship program for Surfrider for like 30 years.
So this is the volunteers within the chapter networks going to their local beach, collecting the samples, sending them off to a lab, and then that lab gives you the data and you keep a
Yeah,
warehouse of the
we
data.
build our own labs actually. So we have 50
Okay.
labs, in-house Surfrider labs. We
Oh,
use
I
an
didn't know that.
EPA approved methodology. So we build a little lab. They're usually in a garage, or sometimes they're like South Orange County, where I live, is being hosted by the Ocean Institute. So sometimes they're hosted by universities or other groups.
Got it. Fascinating. Um, you spoke to it a little bit, but let's do a deep dive into your involvement with Surfrider. When did you first engage with Surfrider, and what's your evolution been?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and so I remember. Uh, it's funny because another thing Surfrider did in the very beginning is I remember the hang tags on clothes, like at Hobie's in Laguna Beach when I was a kid, and they had an educational program about neck back injuries too. So Laguna and Newport are infamous for their shore break. And so a lot of head, neck, back injuries from people going over the falls, pretty common. So they actually had like a little hang tag that talked about like, putting your hands out. And so
Wow.
I remember that from like when I was like, a high school kid. So another thing that they were kind of all over the map in the beginning days. I imagine anyone who had a project could kind of get involved and make it happen.
Yeah.
So I was aware of Surfrider, you know, through high school and college, but it wasn't until grad school for me when I did a master's in coastal environmental management. Um, and I was a broke grad student. So I came home. My dad ran an oceanography summer camp. So I worked for him. And I volunteered at Surfrider in 1995, so 30 years ago, and did a project on artificial surf reefs, which I turned into my master's project for grad school. And then after that, I got a job for a couple years working up in Oregon, and job opened up in 1998. And because I had done my internship, I was kind of a known entity. So I got a job to be the environmental programs manager, working on Blue Water Task Force, beach cleanups, trying to upgrade those programs. Um, about a year and a, I think there was 5 staff at the time, tiny
Wow.
six, about $1 million a year budget. And my boss, the environmental director, like 1 year into my job, quit. Surfrider didn't have any money, so they looked at me and said, "Hey, you're the environmental director now." So then I had that job for 16 years as Surfrider grew and built up the programs and the staff. And what was it, 11 years ago, I got hired. 2014, I got hired as the CEO. So I've been here forever.
Amazing. Yeah. No, amazing. Know every aspect of the business, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm like the mailroom to the CEO story.
Totally. Well, can you illuminate a little bit about the source of funding for Surfrider and then also what are the main expenses for the foundation?
Our funding, we're about a $15 million a year organization. Um, And in my tenure as CEO, we've gone from like 5 million to 15 million. So we've really grown a lot over the last decade. Um, before that, for the 10 years prior to that, we were kind of at 5 million. Um, that money, and it's shifted a little bit, but that money basically comes from four primary sources. Um, what we call major gifts. So this is individuals who will write us a check for like basically above $1,000. Memberships, or 50,000 dues paying members that are like, giving us 25 to 50 to $100 a year. Um, Grants, so a lot of foundation grants that fund work on climate change, plastic pollution, marine conservation, and then corporate partnerships. So businesses that make donations to Surfrider are the sort of four big chunks of the budget. And then there's a bunch of little things. We do a couple events a year and get some fundraising out of that. There's workplace giving programs, so people can actually donate on their paycheck. It's like a pre-tax donation. So a bunch of little other ways. There's probably 20 or 30 other like little sources that kind of collectively make that budget. Um, and that those four primary sources have been kind of the main sources since I've been around. Um,
What are the major expenses?
yeah, the almost I think almost 65% of our money is spent on people. And we're a people-based organization, this grassroots-based model. So we have regional staff. We break the country into 10 regions: Hawaii, 4 states on the West Coast, Gulf, Great Lakes, Maine, down to Florida and Puerto Rico. So we have these regional reps that are supporting those volunteers. We have a complementary, not all places, but in a lot of places, a policy person that can link the grassroots coastal work to state bills and other coalitions. So that's a big chunk of the staff. We have policy and science experts on clean water, plastic pollution, coast and climate change, beach access, and ocean conservation. So we have like a team of issue experts that support all that work, make sure it's science-based and done professionally. We have a small but mighty legal team, and then we have like HR, marketing, operations, all the stuff any normal business would have. But um, so that's a big chunk of the money. Another big chunk of the money is spent on training. So we do a lot of training for our grassroots activists on how to organize, how to recruit volunteers, how to win a campaign, how to be an effective advocate in DC, that kind of thing. So those are really, and the rest of the funding is boring. It's fulfilling membership, right? It's like we're running basically a $50,000 magazine or 50,000 subscriber magazine subscription business. So we're fulfilling t-shirts and
Yeah.
we're paying rent on a building in San Clemente. So the rest is pretty, but it's really staff.
How secure or precarious has the funding been of the organization over the years?
It's been a roller coaster ride. Um, when I got hired almost 11 years ago, we were at a low point. I think we had like 6 weeks of operating cash in the budget. And so if anything went sideways, like we could have been in real trouble. Um, and so, nonprofit fundraising, everybody thinks it's easy until they try to do it, me
Mm.
included. Um, and so, now we have a bit more cash reserve so we can breathe a little easier. Our budget's also like a hockey stick because 10% of all charitable giving in the country happens on the 31st of December, which is like a tax thing. So 40% of our revenue comes in November and December, which is when people start thinking about charity. Giving Tuesday is right after Thanksgiving, and that kind of kicks it off. And so we need enough money to kind of get through the year. We raise it all at the end of the year, and we kind of spend it all the first 3 quarters of the year. So it's like this. Um, but yeah, there were times in the early days where we were on the precipice of going bankrupt and not existing. So back in the like early 90s, 1995, so the organization had been around for I guess 10 years. We were on the brink of going belly up. We didn't have enough money to pay the bills. And you know, we were just trying to like basically live from month to month, and we needed enough money to like we didn't have enough money to send out a fundraising solicitation in the mail to raise the money that we needed to, pay the rent. Uh, and this was again before my time, but I've heard the stories. And um, Pearl Jam, Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam famously made a $50,000 donation. And there's this picture of Pierce Flynn, former executive director, and Eddie Vedder, like at the San Diego Sports Arena before Pearl Jam went on, like handing this check over. And of course, that was kind of like Pearl Jam was, probably at maybe their peak early days. I think they were like in that like 92 or 93 was their first breakout. So this is pretty heady times for like the grunge scene. And that $50,000 check like saved us. We were able to like get the fundraising appeals out, just enough money to like crank up the machine to get us through tough times. So
Have they remained supporters of the organization?
they have. They continue to support us when there was a, big oil spill a couple years back in Huntington Beach. We got a significant donation from Pearl Jam to sort of tackle that issue. Um, Occasionally, it's amazing. Like occasionally, Eddie Vedder will wear a Surfrider t-shirt when he's playing, and talk about like the power these people have. He'll wear the t-shirt, and like my phone will light up from all over the place because people are like, I just saw Eddie Vedder on stage wherever wearing the Surfrider t-shirt. So, you know, apparently he has his outfit has a lot of power itself. So
Amazing.
yeah, so anyway, they've been consistently, and then there's the Mom albums, which you mentioned. They've been sort of consistently supporting us for, over 30 years, which is pretty cool.
I'm curious if you've identified any themes to the kind of threats that Surfrider has faced over the course of the 40 years. Is there a commonality among the threats?
Yeah, there's a couple of different themes, I think. One is, and I think about this, some of it is like what I would think of as like either naivete or apathy, right? Like we just didn't understand that the world got really small, so we pollute because we thought there was a place called a way and we could like send plastic or effluent and the ocean would dissolve it and it would take care of it. And so, and we've as a population gotten so big so fast. Now we have global impact. So I think part of it was, and that's along with that is inertia. So I think that's part of it. Some of it's greed. People want to build oceanfront condos on the beach and seawalls and close off access. And so like there's incredible real estate value on the coast. And so some people don't care about the environment. They just want to like make their money or not pay to clean up their effluent that's coming out of the pulp mill or the U.S. steel mill in Lake Michigan. Um, and I think some of it's just sort of like this, what I think of as like along with this idea of we've gotten so big, is we live in a linear economy. So what that means is we produce stuff using natural resources, we consume it, and then we throw it away. And so you think about like all the stuff you put in your trash can every day, and that goes into a landfill. So, and that system is okay when there weren't that many people on the planet, but now that system is not sort of at a very fundamental level is not sustainable, almost by definition. And the opposite is a circular economy, which is what nature does, right? You think about like a tree. That tree grows, even produces leaves and fruit. They don't have to be landfilled. They're not toxic. They dissolve and back become dirt and become nutrients for the next tree. So nature's been circular for billions of years. We've been around for not a very long time, and we've built this kind of extractive, wasteful, linear economy. So it's like we just need to rethink how, and that's what we're trying to do with plastics. Like we need a circular economy. We need to like build plastic, use plastic, recycle plastic, and not keep mining new resources and emptying it in some landfill or the ocean.
Yeah. What are the current major priorities for Surfrider? And then also, are there any challenges that you anticipate for the next 40 years that you need to plan for?
Well, the last 4 months have probably been the most challenging 4 months in my 30 years. But yeah, you know, in 2022, kind of at the back end of COVID, we passed another strategic plan. And we do these things every 3 to 5 years. And this was the most forward-looking one we've ever done. And we're like, hey, let's get rid of these single-use plastics and see if we can get back to a largely plastic-free ocean. So that's driving, we passed a state bill in Oregon to get rid of a bunch of single-use plastics just last week that was signed by their governor, and we passed one of these polluter pays, extended producer responsibilities bills in Washington. So we're marching forward to try to get back to a plastic-free ocean. There are people alive today who were in the ocean when there's no plastic in it. So in one generation, we kind of, in 90 years, we kind of did that to ourselves. So we want to try to unwind that. So a lot of work trying to do that. Um, and then, climate change is this big issue. Sea levels are rising. They've risen about 8 inches in the last 100 years. They're going to double that in the next 50. So all the coastal erosion issues, beach nourishment issues, seawalls, all that's going to come. And our response to that is to restore coastal habitats, build coastal resilience through nature, create nature-based solutions, and then figure out how to adapt. And Surfers Point is the marquee example of that, maybe in the country. We're doing similar work in other spots. So, like, how are we going to manage our coasts in the face of climate change is a big focus of ours, figuring out what to do because we want beaches and surfing and all these things. And then third is really trying to tackle these water quality issues, which were issues we were working on 40 years ago. Still too often it's not safe to surf, swim, or play in the ocean after it rains. Um, in urban places, that's because of urban runoff, and in rural places, that's because of septics and cesspools. So it's kind of both sides, and it's such a fixable solution.
Mhm.
We should be able to solve that. And so those are kind of the big issues. The Trump administration was bad the first round, much worse this time around. They want to drill off our coasts. They want to get rid of all the important laws and policies that allow us to like the Clean Water Act that we need to fight these fights and keep pollution out of the ocean. And they're gutting agencies like NOAA, the nation's ocean agency, that are responsible for managing. They're the ones that respond to an oil spill. They're the ones who manage coastal development, and the EPA, which is the Environmental Protection Agency, which is our uh, implements the Clean Water Act and prevents pollution from entering the air or water.
So now more than ever, the ocean needs more friends.
It really does. I mean, one of the things that I think is really interesting is the issues we're working on are popular. There's a big current fight right now, which is on public lands. They want to sell off a bunch of our public lands. It turns out a lot of those are coastal. A map came out this week. So there's public lands in California, Oregon, Washington, Alaska that are right on the beach and the coasts, that are up for sale. And 80% of the public wants that land to be protected. So we have these issues where huge majorities of the people want something, but our elected officials are not doing it. So there's a huge disconnect, right, between what we as Americans want and what our supposedly representative government is doing. And so how do you close that gap? Voting and civic activism. So that's what we're trying to do, is why are our elected officials doing things none of us want them to do? And the real answer to that is because we're not participating. And it's, fortunately, as long as we have a democracy, it's actually really easily solvable, which is we just need to impose our public will on the decision makers. Vote them out if you don't like what they're doing, and actually tell them what you want. And so, at a really fundamental level, that's whether we're at a city council meeting in a local town telling them to get rid of plastics or cigarettes on the beach, or we're saying, tell your congressman not to sell off these public lands or drill off the coast. That's the next big fight coming, is we're going to be back to trying to stop drilling off our coastlines.
So how do listeners get involved?
Yeah, it's easy. Join Surfrider, become a member. Uh, $5 a year is a minimum. It's nothing. There's power in numbers. It'll connect you to the work we're doing, and we exist to help regular people in communities find ways to become effective advocates for these places we love. So we make it easy and fun.
So you talked about the inception point really being in the labor room with your daughter. Uh, does she surf or did she ever
Yeah,
surf?
yeah, yeah. She and I didn't force her into it. I didn't demand it of her. When she was 5 years old, we'd paddle out at Malibu, and she'd be on my back, and I'd, stay prone, and she'd hold on to me, and then we'd get a really good wave, and then she'd say, "Okay, Daddy, that's our one wave. Let's go into the beach now." I'd go, "Yeah, but it's 3 to 5 foot, and it's perfect, and it's not that crowded." But I didn't say that. Okay, I just said, "Okay." So there I am making sandcastles with my 5-year-old daughter, watching Malibu, really good. Slowly but surely, she liked it. Okay, and she lived at Point Doom for a while, and she ended up being able to surf Malibu itself, all these years.
41 years ago, Glenn Hening, Tom Pratte, and Lance Carson saw an imminent threat to the quality of the wave and the quality of the water at their home break of Malibu. Through their unity and action, they've preserved the natural resource and even reversed the human impact. They preserved it for humanity and proved that the ocean needs more friends. Now more than ever, in fact. So get involved and help support the Surfrider Foundation through the next 40 years of ocean and environmental conservation at surfrider.org. My name is David Scales for the Surfrider Podcast, brought to you by the Surfrider Foundation. And until next time, learn more at surfrider.org.